The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening all, and welcome to the first Young Investors Club webinar for 2018. Great to have you along. My name's Jake Saul, I'm the president of the Young Investors Club. Crazy to think we're already halfway through February. The year is just flying. So we'll get straight into it. So again, general disclaimer here, I'll let you read that. Seek professional advice with any of this, particularly some of the topics I'm going to talk about tonight. This is just general information, so please talk to your accountant, your broker, whoever that may be. I'm going to discuss tonight some property lingo. So sometimes, and I'm guilty of this, we fall into the trap of using all these acronyms and these sayings, and we take it for granted that people know what we're talking about, but a lot of the time most don't. And even I was discussing this with a property mentor of mine this week, and showed them what I was going to be discussing, and there was a few things they didn't really know about or had heard about. So a lot of it will be more aimed at the first-time investors, but there's some other information there that'll appeal to most of us. So I'm going to go through just a few acronyms and some different terminology you'll hear around property investing. While we're going, this is an interactive webinar, so you can, if you've got any questions during it, please type them through. I'll try to get to them during the presentation. If not, I'll respond to you all with an email shortly after the webinar. We've also got, I've created just a quick handout on these acronyms and whatnot, so if you can download that sheet. That'll also be emailed out to you. And during the presentation, I'm just going to do a quick poll, and there'll be a survey at the end of it as well. Let's kick into it. So it's in alphabetical order, so hopefully it's not confusing with the order I go through it. There might be some conflicting stuff, but hopefully it's nice and easy to follow. Again, this is being recorded, so if I rush over something, you'll be sent the recording and you can go back and watch it, I guess. So CGT, capital gains tax, hopefully we don't need to be too across this. It's more in the event of selling the asset that the government will put out their hand and ask for some money, as they like doing. So capital gains tax is more relevant when, let's say, we've acquired a property and then sold it at a profit. There'll be capital gains tax implications there. So that's what that is about. Cross-collateralise. Now this is an important one. This is something to discuss with your broker. Generally the bank won't tell you about this. Cross-collateralising or cross-securitisation. This is where they'll lock in. So let's just say you've got two properties. They'll lock it all together into one loan, but it's secured by both properties. So ideally what we talk about is having standalone security, which means each property is its own security. The advantage of this is if we do go to sell that property, or let's say there's some equity in that property, which is another thing I'll get to later, we can actually just go to that one property and take out the increased value. I guess an example of cross-collateralising where it's not good, let's say we've got a property that's gone up 200,000, so there's 200,000 in equity there, and let's say the other property hasn't moved in value. If they're standalone, we could go straight to that $200,000 property increase and take that money out. But if they were cross-collateralised, they'll lock them both together and average it out, and then you've only got access to $100,000. So it really does make a big difference. So being able to have them secured against themselves, standalone properties, is sort of what we encourage with our investors. So it's the banks prefer to cross-collateralise because they see it as less of a risk, and like I said, they've locked them all together. They've sort of got you by the short and curlies when they do that. So ideally, you want them standalone and not cross-collateralised. Many of our members who come to the property club who have already got properties, they are structured this way. It can be unraveled. It can be messy and quite expensive, but it can be done. But talk to your broker about this. Deposit versus funds to complete. This is one that gets confused a little bit. So I guess deposit is more just the holding of that particular property. So let's just say we we had a property online and it asked for a 10% deposit. That's just the amount you need to put down to hold that property before settlement, so the vendor can see or the seller can see that you're, that you want to go ahead with that purchase and you can't sell it to anyone else. Whereas funds to complete is at settlement or after settlement, well, at settlement, the actual amount that it's going to cost you once your loan's been factored in to actually go ahead with that purchase. So, example, $500,000 property. Let's say they ask for a 5% deposit, which is $25,000. Come settlement, once you've got your loan, you need to pay the gap there. It might be $50,000. So that's your funds to complete, and that's the number you need to be aware of. So deposit is more just to hold the property, whereas the funds to complete is the actual amount of money you'll need to have in savings or equity, whatever it might be, to go ahead with the purchase. So don't confuse the two. Due diligence, we're probably aware of what this is. It's important you do this with whatever you do. So we're here to help educate you and guide you and give you as much information as you can. But when it comes down to property selection, even picking the correct bank or product, you still need to do your own research, your own due diligence to be comfortable with the decision you're making. Equity, so I did mention this word previously, and this is one you've heard a lot of, I'm sure. Just to clarify what equity is, I guess, it's simply what I've put there. It's the value of property less any outstanding loan. So I'll use the 500K example again because that's a nice easy number. If we have a loan of $300,000 and the property is now worth $500,000, we have $200,000 worth of equity. So it's any difference between the value of the asset versus any loans against that. First homeowners grant. Again, every state has their own grant and their incentives in place. It's a great springboard and opportunity that all young people should utilise this into getting into the market sooner and for less out-of-pocket expenses. Again, each state has its own criteria. For example, Queensland has a $20,000 grant. Property needs to be new. You need to have lived in the property within the first 12 months for a minimum of 6 months. There's other bits and pieces of criteria there which you can talk to your state's Young Investors Ambassador or your property mentor. They'll have all the details about that there. GST, goods and services tax. Property is exactly the same. There's a 10% tax surcharge on purchase of property, so be across what the difference between inclusive and exclusive is. So make sure when you're looking into anything that the GST amount has been factored in to your costs there. Interest only. So there's two types of loans really. You've got principal and interest or interest only. So when you borrow money from the bank, they charge you interest on that borrowed money. So I guess interest only is where you're only paying the interest component. So you're not actually paying down your debt or your loan. You're just paying back the expenses there are or the interest component with that loan that they might charge you. So if the bank's charging you 5% interest, you're only paying back that amount. You're not actually reducing the debt. We'll get onto the other principal and interest example shortly. Well, this goes with the last one, interest rate, fixed versus variable. So quite simply, you can either fix your interest rate, and this is quite advantageous, I believe, especially for younger people in budgeting. You know exactly what your contributions and your outgoings are going to be for a set period of time, and different banks offer different time periods for fixing rates. It might be 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, even up to 15 years. I know CDO offer 15-year fixed rates, so it's very helpful in budgeting and knowing what your outgoings are going to be for that set period of time. So I remember with my first 3 or 4 properties starting out, I put them on fixed rates because then I was able to budget accordingly. And variable is the opposite. So variable can change based on the comparison rates and whatnot the bank is offering at that time. So these are the ones that fluctuate. and and sometimes they can be lower or higher than the fixed rate. The thing to try and remember with if you do fixed rate, it's not necessarily what the amount you're fixing at the time. It's more when it pops out of that term. So if you're looking at, say, the bank's offering 2 years fixed and 3 years fixed, and the 3-year fixed is maybe slightly lower than the 2, maybe the banks are predicting that in 3 years' time the rates might be on the slight incline. So the key is not when you lock them in, but when you're popping out what the rates. So that's a bit of forecasting. Do your due diligence there with that and work out what's best for you. I guess for myself, I've got 6 properties, 3 are fixed and 3 are variable. So we've got a bit of a mixture there. LMI, or risk fee, so lender's mortgage insurance. So this is basically a premium which you pay. So when you're purchasing a property, and I'm jumping ahead here a bit, when your LVR, your loan to value ratio, is that the next one? No, it's not. All right, I'll go back one. When your LVR is above 80%, you will incur lender's mortgage insurance. That's a premium you pay, and it just protects the bank. It doesn't protect you, it just protects the bank against you defaulting on your loan. It isn't. It's a once-off fee that you'll pay, and like I said, most banks, if it's above 80%, some are 70, but most are 80. Once you're above that, you'll need to pay that. Don't be too afraid of utilising lender's mortgage insurance. I've used it for all of my purchases because what it enables you to do is put down less of your own money or the funds to complete, and enables you to potentially buy properties that are more quickly. So instead of saving up the 20% deposit, you might only be saving up 10%. And what I've found so far with my accountant is I've been able to claim back the LMI, the lender's mortgage insurance, as a tax deduction, as it's a loan cost attributed to investing in property. Again, check with your accountant if that one's applicable, but that's what I've found with mine so far. Line of credit. This is more relevant, I guess, to people who already own property. And we spoke about equity before. So let's say we have some equity in the property. Instead of, it's sort of like a personal loan, I guess, or a loan, but it's secured against that asset, and you can get them. Well, I've got a line of credit secured against one of my properties, and I just pay the interest component on whatever I've drawn down from that. So let's say you've set up a line of credit for $100,000. If it's an interest-only line of credit, you only pay interest on the amount you've drawn down. So if it's $100,000 and I've used $40,000, I'm paying interest on that $40,000. Again, is it an interest-only or a principal and interest line of credit? That's, again, something for you to talk about with your broker. But generally, that line of credit is secured against another property. LVR, that's one I jumped to before. Loan to value ratio. The higher the LVR you attain, the less funds to complete or money of your own you need to put towards a purchase. Generally, owner-occupier loans, you can attain a higher loan to value ratio. It's all about risk with the banks. So they see owner-occupiers as less of a risk. They're less likely to default on loans, so they're willing to lend you a little bit more money. Owner-occupiers can get 90, 95, even up to 97% LVR, whereas an investor, you're more looking at 90 is the top amount there. The higher the LVR, less funds to complete you need to put down, and money out of your own pocket. Owner-occupier, you're able to achieve a higher LVR generally. And that LMI we spoke about, anything above 80% normally. Any LVR above 80%, you will be paying the lender's mortgage insurance. Off the plan, so this is when you're buying a property that hasn't been built yet or it's still under construction, as opposed to a completed property. So there are advantages with buying off the plan, one being, for example, a house and land. If you're buying a house and land property, you only pay stamp duty on the land component. So that's one example of buying off the plan. That's probably a topic I might get into at some point as well, explaining house and land, how there's one contract and two contracts and the differences between them, advantages, disadvantages. So sorry to digress there, but that just sort of comes to me. Offset account, again, more relevant if you've if you've already got, say, a mortgage or on your own home or an investment property. So you can actually have an account that sits to the side of that, I guess, which offsets the amount of interest you're paying on that loan. So it's probably easiest me giving an example. So I've got a loan, say my home loan's $500,000. So it's $500,000. Sorry. Let's say in my offset account I've got $100,000. When I'm paying interest, the interest costs, that $100,000 offsets the $500,000. So instead of paying interest on $500,000, I'm just paying it on $400,000. So I guess what that means is I'm able to pay off that loan potentially quicker if I keep my repayments the same. So that's the advantage of having an offset account. Check with your account on this sort of stuff as well, but generally your own place, which isn't an investment property, there's no tax deductions to be made, and it's considered a bad debt. So having an offset account attributed to a bad debt like that is more advantageous than having, say, an offset account on your investment property, because generally what I've found is that the interest component on that loan is tax deductible on your investment property, but not on your own place, obviously. So if you are to have an offset account, what I've done anyway is had it on my own house, which is considered a bad debt rather than investment property. Pre-approval, if you're in the market for looking for a property, this is something you'd go get potentially with your broker or your bank first. Just gives you an indicative idea of what you can borrow. It's not a loan necessarily, but they'll give you a figure that you can borrow. It's all subject to the property and if the bank's happy to lend against that property, and there's other hoops you need to jump through, but a pre-approval is just a nice little thing to have before you go shopping, really. Principal and interest, so we looked at interest only before, so there's two different loans, principal and interest only. Generally, they're over a 30-year term, and the principal is the loan amount, and paying principal and interest, you're actually reducing your debt, whereas interest only, the debt remains constant, whereas paying part of the principal or the loan amount, your debt's reducing over time. So obviously your holding costs, so let's just say you purchase a property, you're paying principal and interest, your repayments are going to be higher initially, but as that debt starts to reduce down over time, then your repayments will become lesser and lesser, whereas interest only, they're always going to, taking into account interest rates, it's always going to remain constant. It's been a bit of a change in the finance landscape as well, the difference between interest rates with principal and interest as opposed to interest only. So previously, and most of my properties which I acquired earlier on were interest only loans because the difference between the two was negligible. But now you're seeing a difference of, say, 0.6, 0.7, even up to a whole % difference between interest only and principal and interest. So particularly to the younger investors, paying down the debt is not a bad thing to be doing it, and I'm tending to see that it's a little bit easier, and the banks are more willing to lend money based on a principal and interest loan rather than an interest only, because they see there's less of a risk. And like I said, at the end of the day, you want to be owning that asset or owning as much as you can. So it's sort of seen as forced savings, I believe, principal and interest, and not a bad option to look at. So these are things that you discuss with your broker as well. Per annum, per year, when we discuss, when you're looking at all sort of numbers, you can break it down to a weekly or a monthly or an annually thing. So that's just what per annum means. Principal place of residence, so for tax reasons, you can only have one principal place of residence. So that's what that means. Quantity surveyor, so what that is a depreciation. So for us investors with investment properties, as I spoke about briefly before, one of the things you can claim is depreciation on the property. So the building, and if it's brand new property, the internals. To be able to claim that depreciation, you need a depreciation report done by a quantity surveyor. So that's what a quantity surveyor is. Very important to have a quantity surveyor's report when you've got investment properties. ROI, return on investment. So again, this is normally a percentage. It's broken down into a percentage. You want to make sure, and a lot of it is, a little bit of it is hypothetical as well. If you're doing some forecasting, you might need to hypothetically assume what rental increase is going to be and that sort of thing. But ROI sort of looks at how much bang for your buck I guess you're making. Serviceability. This is a term that your broker or your bank will use. So just your ability to be able to service a loan, I guess. So lots of things are factored in there. Your income, your age, how long you've been in your job for, do you have any kids, what sort of other loans you may have, do you have car loans, HECS debts, all that sort of thing. So that's working out, and that when you go to get a pre-approval, you're looking at your serviceability and your ability to be able to service that loan. And self-managed super funds, not really something for the younger crowd per se, I guess. I mean, I've got a self-managed super fund set up. Because I was a sole trader and self-employed, I didn't tend to pay myself too much super. So I guess that's what my properties are. That's my super. My wife was a PAYG. She'd earned a little bit of super over the years. So what we did is consolidated it all together. We're taking control of our own destiny, I guess you could say, and I think we're instead of allowing someone else or an industry super fund or something like that to invest our money, we'd like to do it ourselves. So we'll be looking at buying a property within our super over the next couple of years. There are costs associated with setting up one of those. The accountant needs to have it audited and do all that sort of stuff annually, whatever they do. But that might be another option for you down the track, looking at setting up a self-managed super fund if you don't already have one, and finding out what you can do with that. That's a really specialised topic, not something I'll probably get into with the Young Investors Club stuff. Maybe at one of our presentations we'll get a special guest along to talk about something like that. And yield's an important one. So when we're looking at the holding cost or the return on investment, I guess, with a property, we're looking at yield. Gross versus net, very important. When you look at most advertised properties, they'll just give you the gross yield, which is sort of basically all it is the rental income versus the purchase price. Whereas you really need to, as an investor, work out the net yield. So once all of your expenses are factored in, what your actual return on investment or your actual yield is, as opposed to just the rental versus the purchase price. So as investors, we really need to work out the net yield on a property. So let me just go back there. So I'm just going to open up quickly what have I got here, a poll. So this is, I'm just going to launch this poll here. It's just asking you how many of you already knew what this sort of all meant. So I'm just getting some feedback here. I'm hoping you either picked up a couple of things or explained a lot. Awesome. Yeah, just let me know how you found that, if there's anything of interest there. As I'm going, I'm getting a few questions coming through. What I might do, as I said, is respond to those individually after this session's over, and answer any questions that way. Okay, just a couple more seconds and I'll close off that poll. Great, okay. So, what I thought I'd get into with here, I'll just talk about negative gearing. There's lots of explanations out there as to what it is, and I tend to find they can be a little bit confusing. So again, I'm going to sort of show you how I think about it and how I explain it, I guess, a little bit to people I know. It's up to you, you'll interpret it a little bit differently, but this is just the way it helps me explain it. Again, consult your professionals about all this. But we've all heard of positive cash flow properties versus negative cash flow properties. So I guess positive cash flow is just basically when the rental income is greater than all your other expenses. So, if you're getting a higher return on your rent and annually or whatever it is, it's earning more money than all your outgoings, that's a positive cash flow property. And a negative cash flow is the opposite. In an ideal world, you'd have positive cash flow on a property where we're going to look at long-term capital growth as well, but generally the two don't go together. You try and find that sweet spot, I guess, but you'll tend to find properties with a very high yield or positive cash flow, where there's a big shortage of supply of properties because perhaps there's been one industry like a mine, for example, that's just opened up and there's been a big influx of people moving there, so there's a shortage. The old supply and demand economics 101 there, so that way the rental yield is very high. What you'll tend to find though is these areas of strong positive cash flow, like I said, are very reliant on one industry. Once that industry collapses or is no longer required there, those rents will then drop away as all the people will move away. So just think about your mining towns, Gladstone, places like that where it was booming. 18 months, 2 years later, then the mine closes, everyone moves out, and all of a sudden your rents drop big time. Whereas traditionally, and what we look for with capital growth, what are the drivers behind that? It's about constant population increase, whereas the government's spending most of its money on infrastructure. It needs to tick all about what's going to appeal to the tenants, I guess. Is it close to schools, all the other amenities, hospitals, shops, transport? So that's sort of what we look for, long-term capital growth, because that's where the real money is, not necessarily on rental income. It's more the long-term appreciation of that asset and equity, which we spoke about before. So what's negative gearing? I've waffled on there a little bit. So what is negative gearing? My thoughts are it's the ability to be able to claim a tax deduction of that negative cash flow. Okay, so we're lucky in Australia and we've got that in place. And easiest way to show it's a quick example. So let's assume your current income on this example anyways is 90,000, and the rental income. So you've got one investment property and it's generating whatever that is, $400 a week or a little bit more. So a little bit less, sorry. So for 20,000. So that takes your overall total income up to 110,000. Okay. But then what we're able to do is the rental deduction. So again, check with your accountant what all these are. But in my experience, what I've been able to claim is your interest costs on the loan, the depreciation on the property management costs, maintenance associated with it. So all those costs added together have actually equaled $35,000. So what that means is we take those deductions off our income, and that now brings our taxable income down to $75,000 as opposed to $90,000. Okay, so previously we were getting taxed on $90,000, which is just under $21,000, but now we're getting taxed on $75,000. So you can see there the difference between the two is $5,000, and that's sort of how I sort of think of it as negative gearing. So yeah, the ability to claim that that rental loss against your salary, and that's how we're able to hold properties. So let's assume we've bought a new property. The cash flow, the negative cash flow, might be $100 a week by the time you pay your rent. Receive your rent, but then you've got all the outgoings associated, so your management fees, maybe body corporate fees, whatever it might be. So let's just say that's $100 a week, but then you're getting this tax credit of $5,000 annually. That then can offset that $100 a week, and you're pretty much holding the property for nothing. So that's the ability of negative gearing and how we're able to hold these properties for next to nothing. So I hope that helped explain that a little bit. You've got a clearer understanding of when people talk about negative gearing, what it is, and how, in practice, how it actually works. Okay, well, that's about it. We're pretty much on time, which is fantastic. It's always good when we can run on time. I'm hoping they're just a couple of topics that I've been given feedback on that I'd like to hear more. So I'd love to get more feedback on putting these events on for you guys and helping you hopefully build a portfolio of properties. And, it sounds boring to discuss, but you don't want to rely on the pension and the super. They're both a dying thing and not too appealing. And when we're at the age of needing them, who knows if they'll exist, or we might be 90 before we're allowed to touch our super. So take control in your own hands. Property is an awesome way to go. It's certainly helped myself and my family, and so we really want to gear you up and give you all the information we can to help you guys do the same thing. Just a little plug for an event we're doing in New South Wales. We did one at Dooley's there November, I think, last year. It was really good. Different content. We'll try and keep content up to date, fresh. So any feedback you're sort of giving as well, we'll look at covering all that sort of stuff. It'd be great to have you along. I believe it's a free event. We always put on a few drinks and nibbles afterwards, so that's a really good time to interact and get to know you guys a little bit better. But please come along. I think you can click on that the image here. Actually, it'll take you through the registration details, but I'll also send it out via email afterwards on this once we finish this webinar. So thanks very much for your attendance. There'll be a short survey that's just going out after this, so I can just respond to that one. I'll leave the webinar open for just another 30 seconds or so. So if you've got any questions, just type them in the chat box now, and I'll get back to you all within the next day or so. But thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it, and I hope you all have enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you at a YIC event soon. See you guys.